Have you ever felt like the more you gave, the less you were seen? What if your empathy isn't love, but the very thing being used to destroy you from the inside out? You offer your understanding like it's oxygen. You listen, absorb, hold space. You translate her pain when she can't speak it. You become the mirror, the buffer, the emotional cushion for every storm she brings, not because she asked, but because something deep inside you told you that to be a man means to be available, to be open, to be safe. But here's what no one told you. Your empathy, the thing you thought made you good, might be the very thing that's destroying you. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And nowhere is that more true than in the life of the empathic man. Because if you're not conscious of why you give, who you're giving to, and what it's really costing you, then you're not loving. You're leaking. And you will attract people who treat that leak as a resource. See, here's the brutal truth that most men aren't ready to hear. Some women are drawn to your empathy not because they value it, but because they can use it. They sense your softness like blood in the water. They pick up on your need to be understood, your fear of being abandoned, your inability to say no, and they respond, not with gratitude, but with hunger. They test your limits, they push your patience, they reward your silence with deeper manipulation, and what do? You stay, you explain, you love harder. Because somewhere in your childhood, or maybe in your earliest relationships, you learned that love means sacrifice. That being needed is the same thing as being wanted. That being used is the price you pay to be kept. But Jung would call that a projection, an unconscious pattern replaying itself through your adult life, disguised as compassion. He would ask you, are you really loving her, or are you playing out the unresolved pain of not being seen, not being chosen, not being safe? Because empathy, when unconscious, becomes a weapon, not against others, but against yourself. When you don't know your own boundaries, someone else will set them for you. And often that someone doesn't want your healing, they want your availability, they want your emotional labor, they want your energy without having to earn it. That's the curse of the overgiver. You offer your soul in exchange for scraps of recognition. You pour out everything and call it love, even when it empties you. You convince yourself that endurance is virtue, that pain is proof of depth, that if you just love her harder, she'll see you, choose you, change for you. But she won't. Not because she's evil, but because she's responding to the version of you that doesn't know his own worth, the version of you who's more afraid of being alone than being used, the version who confuses empathy with identity. And that version of you is not in love. He's in survival. He's in a subconscious trance, reliving the pattern where being a good boy, a sensitive boy, a selfless boy, got him temporary affection from someone emotionally unavailable. And now, as a man, he's chasing the same blueprint, but calling it intimacy. Jung warned us, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because once you do that, once you face the part of you that's giving not out of abundance but out of fear, you can't unsee it. You start to recognize every time you abandon yourself to stay connected. Every time you say yes when your soul is screaming no. Every time you let her moods dictate your reality. Every time you trade your backbone for belonging. And it hits you like a punch to the chest. You were never being loved, you were being used, because you refused to love yourself enough to walk away. The overgiver doesn't just lack boundaries, he lacks awareness. He hasn't made the unconscious conscious. He doesn't know that his need to help is often a mask for his fear of rejection, that his ability to feel deeply is beautiful, but also dangerous when it's unchecked. That some women will sense his depth and not dive into it but drain it, not because they're broken, but because it's what he's signaling. He's signaling that he will carry more than his share, that he will absorb pain that isn't his, that he will stay even when disrespected, neglected, or emotionally starved. And in a world where attention is currency, that kind of man becomes a bank. He gives endlessly, and slowly, piece by piece, he disappears. Until one day he looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize who he is anymore. He's not alive, he's available. He's not respected, he's responsive. He's not loved, he's used. That's the erosion Jung spoke of, the spiritual death that happens when you live from the unconscious. When you don't own your shadow, your pain, your inner child's wounds, they own you. And they drag you into relationships where you become the servant, the therapist, the emotional punch bag. You bleed and call it love. But here's your awakening. Empathy is not the problem. Being sensitive, aware, emotionally present, that's a gift. But gifts need guardians. If you don't protect your heart, someone will come along and claim it like it's theirs, not because they're a monster, but because they sense you won't stop them. You'll explain, you'll rationalize, you'll say she's just hurting, and you'll keep giving until there's nothing left. That's the path of the unconscious empath. That's the man Jung was warning. The man who hasn't faced his own darkness, who hasn't looked at his reflection and asked, why do I need to be needed? Why do I tolerate emotional theft and call it loyalty? Why do I keep giving to those who only take? Until you answer that, your life will be run by the parts of you you're too afraid to confront. And you'll keep attracting women who exploit those parts, not out of malice, but out of energetic resonance. Because the world doesn't respond to what you say you want, it responds to what you are. And if you are an overgiver, someone will come along who is ready to take. In this world, attention isn't just a gesture, it's currency. And the moment you begin offering yours freely, endlessly, and without question, you step into an economy you didn't even know existed. Empathic men like you don't just give time, you give presence. You give your listening, your concern, your warmth. You hold space for her storms, validate her confusion, absorb her anxiety like a sponge. And you call it love, you call it support, you call it loyalty. But what if I told you that in today's emotional economy, that kind of giving isn't neutral? What if I told you it's seen as weakness, that the very thing you think makes you safe, makes you exploitable? You were trained, maybe by your mother, maybe by society, maybe by years of unspoken emotional labor, to believe that kindness will earn you affection, that empathy will be met with reciprocity, that if you just keep showing up one day, she'll see your worth. But you're not in a relationship, you're in a marketplace, where attention is the product, where emotion is leveraged, where your ability to care deeply becomes a fuel source for her cycles. She doesn't have to be cruel, she doesn't even have to be aware of what she's doing. All she has to do is keep withdrawing, keep pulling back, keep introducing just enough chaos, and you'll do the rest. You'll come closer, try harder, give more. Why? Because you've been conditioned to mistake urgency for connection. And more than that, you've internalized the lie that if someone's hurting, it's your job to heal them, especially if you love them. But Jung warned us, when a man has not confronted the unconscious within himself, he projects it outward and lives at the mercy of those who reflect it back to him. So now here you are, loving her, caring for her, showing up through her inconsistency, her silence, her emotional volatility. You're doing everything right and you still feel empty, still feel confused, still feel like you're one wrong word away from being discarded. Because this isn't love, this is debt. You're not being loved for who you are, you're being kept for what you give. And every time you extend that emotional credit, hoping it will one day be repaid with stability, clarity, or commitment, you fall deeper into the trap. Because she doesn't owe you anything. That's the part you keep forgetting. In the emotional economy, the empathic man is the supplier. He brings the energy, the support, the emotional regulation she refuses to do for herself, and as long as you keep supplying, she will keep consuming. But the moment you ask for balance, she'll pull away. The moment you stop feeding the dynamic, she'll accuse you of changing. And that's when you see the truth. She wasn't with you, she was with your attention, your kindness, your devotion. So you were the product. This is the sickness of unconscious femininity, the shadow side of the feminine that uses emotion not as a bridge to connection, but as a tool of control. And if you're an empath who hasn't done his own shadow work, you'll walk right into it every time. Because you want to believe that being a good man means being endlessly available, but being good without discernment is not goodness, it's self-abandonment. It's spiritual codependency, it's emotional slavery dressed in the costume of compassion. Jung would say people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And this is exactly what you're doing, avoiding the truth of your own needs, your own wounds, your own longing to be chosen not for your labor, but for your being. You don't just want to be loved, you want to be needed. And that's the crack she slips through. She senses that need. She feels the depth of your heart, but also the emptiness that drives it. And she feeds off it, not maliciously, not always even consciously, but instinctively. Because we all respond to what's unspoken. She doesn't have to know the psychology. Her body reads yours. Your energy says, if you stay, I'll carry everything, and her shadow says, perfect. So you get caught in the loop, the cycle, the game. She emotes, you respond. She pulls away, you pursue. She cries, you fix. She withholds, you bleed more warmth. And all the while, you believe you're building something real, that your consistency will eventually awaken her gratitude, that your empathy will earn her respect. But here's the truth, she doesn't respect you, not because you feel too much, but because you give it away, without asking anything in return. Your heart is noble, but in the world of emotional economics, it's also naive. Because while you're busy proving your worth, she's busy calculating her leverage. She knows what keeps you there. She knows what praise to drop, what vulnerability to share, what memory to bring up just before you finally consider leaving. It's all part of the transaction. You supply the emotional labor, she supplies the illusion of intimacy. But when you finally stop giving, everything stops. The texts slow down, the warmth vanishes, the validation you mistook for love turns cold. Because without your energy, the connection doesn't exist. And now, finally, you see it. You weren't loved, you were accessed. You weren't chosen, you were used. You weren't in a relationship, you were a battery. And it hurts, God, it hurts. Because all you wanted was to matter. All you wanted was to give your heart to someone who wouldn't drop it. But you gave it away before you even knew its value. That's what this world does to empathic men. It teaches them that love is about being useful, that feeling deeply means being endlessly available, that the more you tolerate, the more worthy you become. But Jung would offer you something different. He'd say, real love doesn't cost you your dignity. It doesn't drain you. It doesn't make you a servant to someone else's mood swings. Real love begins when you value your energy enough to stop giving it to those who treat it like a transaction. Because the truth is, your kindness is sacred. But until you believe that, until you stop pouring it into women who only show up to take, you'll never feel seen. You'll just feel spent. And eventually, you'll either collapse or awaken. You thought you were helping her heal, that by holding her through her storms, you'd somehow become the anchor she never had. You believed that your empathy, your ability to feel her pain as if it were your own, was noble, even spiritual. But here's the truth Jung tried to warn you about. You weren't helping her, you were possessed. Not by her body, her charm, her story, but by your own anima. That's what Jung called it, anima possession. When a man has not consciously integrated his inner feminine, he becomes ruled by it, not balanced by it, not supported by it, ruled, enslaved, haunted. And in that possession, you don't just feel. You lose your center. You stop knowing where she ends and you begin. Her sadness becomes your gospel. Her needs become your mission. Her chaos becomes your compass. You don't lead, you follow. And the deeper she spirals, the deeper you sink. Because now your identity is tied to her healing, your worth is measured by her stability, and your purpose is distorted into a single unconscious drive: save her. But here's the tragedy. You're not trying to save her. You're trying to save the part of you that you buried a long time ago. The boy who wasn't protected. The boy who watched someone he loved fall apart and couldn't stop it. The boy who learned that love means sacrifice, that devotion means absorption, and that empathy means dissolving yourself to keep the peace. So now, as a man, you keep choosing the same storm, different face, same pattern. She's wounded, unstable, raw. She opens up just enough to hook you, then shuts down before you get too close. She pushes, you reassure. She withdraws, you pursue. And every time she hurts, you bleed. But not because of her, because of you. Because deep down, your savior complex is just a mask for the truth you refuse to look at. You're not loving her, you're escaping yourself. And the more chaotic she becomes, the more alive you feel, not because it's love, but because it's familiar. You've mistaken drama for intimacy, crises for connection, wounding for depth. And she senses it. Whether she's conscious of it or not, she sees that you will twist yourself into emotional knots to keep her close, that you will trade your peace for her approval, that you'll abandon your own needs to chase hers. But what she doesn't feel is you, because you're not there. You've vanished beneath layers of performance and protection, trying to fix a woman who doesn't want to be fixed, trying to prove your love through emotional martyrdom, trying to outrun the ghost of your own unmet needs by healing hers. That's the curse of anima possession. You don't love women, you serve them, not out of strength, out of guilt, out of unprocessed grief, out of an unconscious belief that your value lies in how much of yourself you can give away. And it always ends the same. You burn out. Because no matter how many wounds you try to hold, they're not yours. No matter how deeply you feel her pain, it will never be enough. No matter how present you are, it won't heal what she's unwilling to face in herself. And in the process, you lose everything that made you a man worth loving in the first place. Your direction, your center, your boundaries. You become soft in all the wrong ways, available but not anchored, emotional but not empowered, giving but not grounded. And she doesn't respect you for it, she uses you for it. Because a man possessed by the feminine is not safe. He's volatile, reactive, unable to stand firm, and no matter how much she cries for connection, she cannot trust a man who disappears inside her emotions. She'll test you over and over, hoping you'll hold your ground, that you'll set a boundary, that you'll say no more. But you won't, because to you conflict feels like abandonment, saying no feels like betrayal, walking away feels like failure. So you stay, and slowly you die inside. You forget your voice, your truth, your fire. You think your love can save her, but what you're really doing is hiding. Because as long as she's the problem, you never have to look at your own. As long as you're busy fixing her, you don't have to face the emptiness inside you. The boy who never learned to protect himself, the man who never learned to say, I am enough, even if no one else says it. Jung believed that integration is the path to wholeness, that unless a man meets his inner feminine and claims her, not as a master but as a partner, he will be ruled by her shadow. And that shadow will always show up as a woman, one who mirrors everything you haven't healed, one who pulls you in, not to complete you, but to expose you, to force you to see that your endless empathy is not strength, it's surrender. Not to her, to your wounds. And until you wake up, until you realize that your urge to save her is just a distraction from saving yourself, you will keep bleeding for women who never asked you to. You will keep sacrificing your peace for the illusion of closeness. You will keep mistaking pain for passion. And worst of all, you will keep calling it love. But it's not love. It's possession. And you won't be free until you face it, until you stop asking what does she need and start asking why do I think I don't. That's the only way out. She doesn't test you because she hates you. She tests you because she wants to feel something she can't name. Not your affection, not your understanding, not even your presence. What she's testing for is gravity, a center, a man who will not be moved by the tide of her emotions, a mountain she cannot collapse. But most empathic men, they don't pass that test, not because they're weak, but because they confuse absorbing with anchoring. They think being deeply available is the same as being deeply rooted. They think if they can just understand her wounds enough, hold her chaos gently enough, give enough of themselves, she will finally feel safe. But here's the truth. The more you dissolve into her storms, the more you vanish, and no woman can trust a man who disappears inside her. This is the shadow dance, where your empathy becomes an invitation, where her wounding becomes a weapon, where both of you are unconsciously colluding in a performance that looks like love but feels like war. And it begins long before you ever meet her. It begins in childhood. You learned early that being needed was the closest thing to being loved, that if you could just anticipate pain, soothe it, understand it, you'd be safe, you wouldn't be abandoned, you'd matter. So you became hyper-aware, hypersensitive, hyper-responsible for the emotional state of others. And when you grew up, that didn't change, you just started calling it love. But the woman who enters your life, she didn't grow up safe either. She didn't grow up feeling fully held, fully seen, fully met. She learned something different, something darker. She learned that control is safety, that vulnerability is dangerous, that emotional power, even if unconscious, is the only way to never feel small again. And now you've found each other. Healed. The man who wants to prove he can love the unlovable. The woman who doesn't believe love exists without manipulation. And so the dance begins. You see her wounds, her fragility, her tears, her outbursts. You feel her pain like it's your own, and you move toward it. You offer comfort, patience, devotion. And she doesn't soften. She gets colder, sharper. She pushes more, withdraws more, tests more. Not because she doesn't see your kindness, but because it terrifies her. She's not looking for kindness, she's looking for containment, for a boundary, for something she can push against and not see collapse. But you don't give her that. You give her more understanding, more apologies, more softness. And every time you do, she loses a little more respect. This is projection. Not conscious, not calculated, but primal. She projects her father wound, her distrust, her unhealed pain onto you and watches to see what you'll do with it. And when you absorb it, when you mirror it, when you treat her dysfunction as a test you need to pass, she knows. You are not him. Not the man who stands in truth, not the man who holds his frame. You're the sponge, the mirror, the man who will bend instead of break. And so she breaks you. Not because she hates you, because her unconscious needs her to. Because if you can't withstand her worst, you don't deserve her best. That's the twisted logic of the shadow feminine, but you don't know that. All you know is that she was hurting and you tried to help, and somehow you're the one who feels drained, confused, used. You keep wondering what you did wrong. You keep trying to adjust. Be more patient, be less reactive, be more supportive. You keep thinking that if you just show up in the right way, say the right thing, hold the right space, she'll finally settle. But she doesn't want to settle. She wants to feel you, not your softness, not your healing energy, not your emotional intelligence, your center. She wants to feel the presence of a man who can say, "No, I see you, I feel you, but I will not bleed for you." Because if you can't do that, she can't trust you. She'll use you, test you, tear you down, but she will never respect you. Because you've become the thing she most despises, a man who claims strength but lives in surrender. Not to love, to her chaos. This is the unconscious collusion that ruins most empathic men. They think their pain is a pathway to her heart. But it's a trap. Because the moment you believe that loving her means losing you, you've already lost her. You've become the servant, the savior, the ghost, and she knows it. She feels the difference between a man who feels deeply and a man who has no core. The first ignites her. The second drains her. And if you haven't met your own shadow, if you haven't looked at your own pattern of needing to be needed, you will keep playing this role over and over, thinking it's love, when it's actually codependence masquerading as compassion. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And this is the darkness you must face. You are not a victim of her chaos, you are complicit in it. You were drawn to it because it gave you a role, a purpose, a mask that felt like meaning. But masks don't build intimacy, they build illusions. And eventually, she sees through yours. So she leaves, or worse, she stays and drains you slowly until there's nothing left but a shell of the man who once thought he could save her. But you can't save her. You can only save you. And until you do, until you stop colluding with her chaos, stop romanticizing her wounds, stop offering your soul in exchange for temporary closeness, you will never find the love you seek. Because the kind of woman who will meet you in truth isn't looking for a sponge. She's looking for a mirror, a man who sees her fully but never loses himself in the process. You gave her everything, your time, your presence, your patience, your silence. You gave her your peace in exchange for chaos, your steadiness in exchange for storms. You opened your soul like it was an offering, laid it bare in the hope that your depth would be seen, your devotion would be honored. And she left. Not with a fight, not with gratitude, but with indifference. She slipped away while you were still bleeding, while you were still trying to hold her together, still replaying every conversation, still hoping that maybe, just maybe, your love would be enough to pull her back. But it wasn't, and it never was. Because love is not measured by sacrifice, not the kind of love that sustains, that transforms, that heals. You confuse suffering for connection. You thought if you could just hurt deeply enough, she would finally recognize what she had. But now, you're sitting in the wreckage, alone. And this is the collapse. Not just of a relationship, of an identity. The version of you that believed love had to be earned is dying. The man who thought empathy was enough is crumbling, and in his place there is nothing but silence, a vast, aching void where your purpose used to be. This is the psychic death Jung warned about, the dismantling of everything you thought you had to be loved. Because until now, you thought your value lived in your ability to endure, to understand her without being understood, to forgive her without being asked, to stay, even when every part of you was screaming to leave. And when she walked away, she didn't just abandon you, she took your narrative with her. She was the reason you kept bleeding, and now you don't even have her as the justification. All that's left is you. You and the question that haunts every empathic man when it's over. Who am I if I'm not saving someone? And the answer is terrifying. Because the truth is, you don't know. You've built your identity on being needed, on being the one who feels everything and fixes nothing. You've called it strength. You've called it love. But it was fear, dressed in compassion, justifying your collapse in the name of connection. And now the mask is gone. Now you see it. You weren't strong. You were afraid of being unseen. You weren't giving, you were trying to earn what you never believed you deserved. You weren't healing her, you were avoiding yourself. And that's the devastation, the heartbreak beneath the heartbreak. Not that she left, died, but that you abandoned yourself long before she did, and now you're left with the silence. Not the silence of her absence, the silence of your soul calling you back. Because in this collapse there is an invitation. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, not who the world conditioned you to be, not who she needed you to be, but who you were before the wounds. And this pain, this shame, this confusion, it's not the end of you. It's the beginning. It's the moment you stop performing. The moment you stop bending, the moment you stop bleeding just to be seen. It's the first breath of a man who no longer needs to suffer to be worthy. But you have to make a choice. You can collapse into bitterness, blame her, hate her, tell yourself the world is broken and no woman will ever deserve your heart. Or you can rise, not with vengeance, with vision. You can reclaim every piece of yourself you gave away, every boundary you abandoned, every truth you silenced, every need you buried under the weight of her moods. Because you are not here to bleed for love. You are here to become it. Not the performative, self-sacrificing, people-pleasing kind of love, the rooted kind, the embodied kind, the kind that knows, I can feel your pain without becoming it. I can love you without losing me. But you can't get there until you walk through this fire, volatility, until you sit in the grief, the rage, the guilt, until you face the part of you that allowed this, chose this, repeated this. Not to shame him, to liberate him. Because that part of you, the overgiver, the emotional sponge, the bleeding heart, he was trying to protect something sacred. Your desire to connect, to feel, to live deeply, that's not the problem. The problem was that you gave that depth to someone who didn't want your soul, just your sacrifice. But now you know. Now you can choose differently. And maybe that's what this collapse is really about. Not the end of love, the end of illusion. The moment you stop mistaking self-abandonment for devotion, the moment you stop calling emotional labor a gift when it's really a cry for validation, the moment you realize she didn't walk away because you weren't enough. She walked away because you were never you. And now you can be, because the man who rises from this isn't the same man who bled for her. He's the man who finally saw himself and chose to stay. That's the lie you were told, that after the collapse your only choice was to build walls, to stop feeling, to close off, cut out, shut down. But real strength, it doesn't come from isolation, it comes from anchoring. This is the part they never teach you. They teach you to feel, to be kind, to give, but they never teach you how to protect what you feel, how to honor your giving, how to give with discernment instead of desperation. No one ever said you can be open and sovereign, but you can. And that's what this chapter of your life is about. Not the death of your empathy, but its rebirth. Not the rejection of your anima, but her integration. Not the denial of your depth, but its direction. Because the man who has integrated his inner feminine doesn't become soft, he becomes whole. He doesn't collapse into her emotions, he contains them. He doesn't absorb her chaos, he stands unshaken in the face of it. That's polarity, not domination, not control. Polarity is truth meeting energy. Masculine presence meeting feminine flow, the grounded meeting the storm, and not flinching. But you can't get there if you keep abandoning yourself every time someone else's pain enters the room. And this is where boundaries are born. Not as a defense mechanism, but as a declaration of sovereignty. Because until now, your love had no edges. Your heart had no gate. You offered yourself like a feast to anyone who looked hungry, and then wondered why you felt devoured. But here's the truth Jung would want you to hear. Empathy without boundaries isn't compassion, it's codependence. You weren't loving her, you were rescuing her, because you couldn't bear to look at the boy inside of you who never felt rescued. That's the shadow, the part of you that wants to be the hero so badly he never stops to ask, why do I need to be? The part that finds his identity in saving others, because he doesn't know who he is when he's not needed. But when you make that part conscious, when you stop running from your own depth, you stop playing the savior, you stop collapsing into her pain, you stop leaking energy trying to earn love that should have been yours without effort, and you begin to rise. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, choose differently, because now you know the difference between availability and sovereignty. Availability says, take what you need from me. Sovereignty says, I know what I offer, and not everyone gets access. That's the shift. From being emotionally porous to emotionally anchored. From seeking validation through sacrifice to embodying value through presence. From bleeding for her storms to standing as the mountain she can't shake. Because real masculinity isn't reactive, it's rooted. It doesn't seek to fix the feminine, it invites her into truth. It doesn't collapse under her chaos. It holds space without losing its center. And most of all, it doesn't prove its worth through pain. It knows its worth in silence. That's the awakening of the sovereign. When you stop needing to be chosen, when you stop performing for her emotions, when you stop mistaking pain for passion and instability for intimacy. And you realize love doesn't demand that you lose yourself. It demands that you show up as yourself and stay. But here's what most men fear, that if they stop overgiving, they'll lose love. But that wasn't love, that was performance. Love doesn't punish your presence, it cherishes it. Love doesn't require your collapse, it respects your edge. Love doesn't want a therapist, it wants a partner. And when you finally integrate your shadow, when you stop projecting your wounds onto the women you try to save, you stop attracting chaos. You start drawing in respect. You stop being magnetized to the broken and start resonating with the whole. Because now, your center is not a performance, it's a presence. And women feel that. They test it, not to hurt you, but to feel you. To see if your words match your energy, if your boundaries are real, if your soul has roots. And when they find out it does, something shifts. Now she doesn't pull away to provoke you, she moves closer to feel your frame. Now she doesn't lash out to feel powerful, she softens to your clarity. Now she doesn't run away from intimacy, she relaxes into your containment. This is the best intimacy she can possibly, because a man who's integrated doesn't need to control her chaos. He simply doesn't absorb it. He feels everything, but chooses what enters his space. He honors his empathy, but protects it with his backbone. And in that balance, depth and direction, heart and spine, he becomes unforgettable. Not for what he gives, but for what he embodies. And that man, he no longer fears being alone, because he's finally come home to himself. The room, the silence, The shift in her voice when she's withholding, the tremble in her hands when she's testing, the unspoken plea in her anger, the manipulation hidden inside the tears. He feels it all, but he no longer moves from it. That's the difference. Because there was a time, not long ago, when every flicker of her pain became his compass, when he twisted himself into shapes just to keep her close, when her validation was his breath and her withdrawal felt like death. He doesn't live there anymore. Now he stands, not in arrogance, in presence, not in resistance, in reverence for himself. He's the man who has walked through fire and stopped pretending it was rain, the man who has bled for love and realized it wasn't love at all, it was conditioning, a lifelong audition for affection he was taught he had to earn. But he doesn't audition anymore. He decides, because the untouchable man is not cold, he is clear. He's not emotionless, he's anchored. And she feels it. The first time she meets him, she feels the difference. She senses that he won't fold under her moods, that he won't mistake confusion for connection, that he won't chase her chaos trying to prove himself worthy. And it unsettles her. Not because he's unsafe, but because he is. Because her usual patterns won't work here. The silent treatment, he doesn't flinch. The emotional outbursts, he doesn't absorb them. The tests, he doesn't take them. And when she pulls away, he doesn't write paragraphs, he doesn't beg, he doesn't explain. He simply notices. And if the energy no longer honors his peace, he leaves. Not with anger, with certainty, because he has felt every shade of heartbreak, every flavor of shame, every desperate apology for things that weren't even his fault. And he is done, not with love, with self-abandonment. Because this man, the untouchable one, he understands what Jung meant when he said, "What you do not make conscious will appear in your life as fate." He's made it conscious. All of it. The mother wound, the need to fix, the savior complex, the way he confused bleeding with bonding, sacrifice with intimacy, tolerance with virtue. He's met his shadow. He's looked into the chaos that used to consume him and said, "No more." And in doing so, he became the kind of man the world doesn't expect but cannot ignore. A man who feels deeply but bows to no one. That's power, not dominance. Dignity. He doesn't raise his voice to be heard, his presence speaks louder than words. He doesn't chase love, he attracts it by embodying it. He doesn't perform, he simply is. And that energy, it doesn't plead, it doesn't explain, it doesn't negotiate with chaos. It holds. And when she meets that man, truly meets him, something in her changes. She realizes the games don't work, the manipulation backfires, the tests reveal her own instability, not his lack of love. Because he's not trying to be liked, he's committed to being true. That's the man she never forgets. Not because he stayed, but because he didn't. Because when the moment came, when her chaos demanded his collapse, he chose himself. He chose silence over justification, space over sacrifice, dignity over dysfunction. And that choice, it echoes. It haunts her, not as guilt, as respect. Because when a man who sees everything still chooses to walk away, he becomes the mirror she can't escape, the one that showed her, maybe for the first time, what it looks like when a man refuses to bleed for love. And in that reflection, she sees what she took for granted. His patience, his steadiness, his presence, his fire. But not in punishment, in peace. He didn't leave to hurt her. He left because he finally stopped hurting himself. That's the untouchable man. Not unreachable. He walks with softness, but never without spine. He loves deeply, but never at the cost of his soul. And in a world that confuses openness with weakness, he's a reminder that true strength doesn't scream. it stands. So if you've ever been the man who gave too much, who bent too far, who stayed too long, understand this. Your gift was never the bleeding, it was the depth. And now, that depth has direction. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't apologize for its standards. It simply says, I see you, I feel you, but I won't lose myself for you. That's not detachment. That's liberation. And that's the man who no longer gets used, he gets remembered forever.